Good morning, and thank you for joining us today in our presentation. I'm Alan Voss, the Director of Education and Content from the Southern Gas Association, and I will be introducing our session and speakers today. Today in this webinar, we will describe how to use advanced mobile leak detection information to enhance existing DEM data for risk evaluation and mitigation activities. These enhancements include selecting pipeline segments for replacement that have been predicted to contain more underground leaks. We will have a question and answer session at the end of the presentation, so please hold your questions until that point. You can post them in the Q&A tab when we reach that point in the presentation. Next, I'd like to go over our standard antitrust disclaimers. The purpose of federal and state antitrust statutes is to assure the preservation of a free and competitive economy. To achieve this end, these laws embody a general prohibition against any agreement or combination among competitors which has the effect of unreasonably restraining trade. It is our policy to conduct activities in strict compliance with all applicable federal and state antitrust laws and to avoid any appearance of impropriety. Our speakers for today are first, Julian Klein, who is the Director of Product Management for Picarro. He has 15 years of experience managing products and leading marketing initiatives in the energy and photonics industries. He has been involved in various end markets, including environmental, photovoltaic, semiconductor, biomedical, and scientific research. He received his BS and MS in applied physics from École Polytechnique. He also holds an MS degree in electrical engineering from the University of Michigan. Next is Caroline Geiger, who is an engineer in distribution integrity management with CenterPoint Energy. She has held various roles in gas distribution design, project management, and integrity management since joining CenterPoint Energy in 2017. In her current role, she has been involved in the DEMP cycle as well as special projects regarding leak analysis in the Texas region. She graduated from Louisiana State University with a BS in mechanical engineering and is a licensed professional engineer in the state of Texas. At this time, I would like to turn it over to Julian Klein, who will get us started off with our webinar this morning. Thanks, Julian.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Julian Klein, Director of Product Management at Picarro. I wanted to thank the SGA for hosting this webinar this morning, and I also wanted to thank Caroline and CenterPoint for co-hosting this webinar. CenterPoint has been a strategic partner of Picarro for the most part of the last decade. Picarro has really grown as a company, technology and service provider, in part thanks to its very strong collaboration with CenterPoint. So I'm very excited to spend the hour here this morning reviewing some of the very exciting work that we've done together with CenterPoint. So in order to provide some context to Caroline's presentation on DIM and the use of ALD to augment DIM, just want to start by reviewing quickly what advanced leak detection is all about. Key advantages of the technique and how it can flows into a number of very interesting applications for natural gas operators. So just a few words on Picarro. Picarro has been active in developing advanced leak detection for the past decade. We are now at a point where we are supporting over 30 natural gas operators worldwide in their various gas asset management activities. And ALD is really at the core of all this. So ALD, advanced leak detection, is a fast, effective, and scalable technique method to cover natural gas networks. The applications that ALD enables are numerous. We tend to focus on three main categories of application. The first one is supporting compliance leak survey with advanced means. The second category of activities is around emissions management. So network emissions reporting and emissions reduction campaigns. And the third topic, which is going to be the topic of the day, is to use advanced leak detection data to guide, augment, and inform pipe replacement programs and DIM programs. So ALD really enables natural gas operators to achieve a number of important goals. The first one is improve infrastructure safety, public safety, and environmental safety. The second key enabler is the ability to quantify, quantify, and reduce methane emissions. And finally, natural gas operators are using ALD-derived information to boost capital efficiency. So to understand the concept of ALD, let's look at this graphic for a second. I think it illustrates the point. So in any distribution network, methane plumes coming from, fugitive emissions coming from methane plumes tend to appear in a stochastic or random fashion. They can be hard to find. And in a typical environment, these methane plumes tend to expand and dilute relatively quickly. So if you see on this graph, a typical methane plume might be at 100% or single-digit percent over a few meters, or a few tens of feet. But as soon as you go away from that leak origin, the plume dilutes and very quickly gets to ppm, parts per million, or ppb, parts per billion level. So unless you're sitting on top of the leak, it can be very challenging to find and quantify these leaks. And typically in traditional leak survey methodology, an investigator, an operator on foot carrying parts per million sensitivity equipment is looking for these leaks. And you can see that it's very difficult to find these leaks unless you happen to walk very close to the origin of the leak. So the concept of advanced leak detection is that we want to leverage much more sensitive equipment, typically parts per billion, and that parts per billion sensitivity allows us to detect and characterize these methane plumes from a distance. So typically the Picarro technology can detect methane with parts per billion sensitivity over 600 feet away from the leak source. And that can be the difference between finding a leak, detecting a plume, and missing it. So if we expand the concept further, you'll see a traditional methodology for covering natural gas infrastructure. So we equip, or we install our sensors, our parts per billion sensors in a vehicle, and we drive over neighborhoods or over a distribution network, typically at the speed of traffic, so up to 40 miles per hour and above. And what we do is we let the wind bring the methane plumes to us. So advanced leak detection is a wind-based measurement technique where we have to be downwind of a potential leak to detect it. So as you see, as we drive the vehicle alongside the mains here, if the wind direction is coming from the left side of the vehicle or the north, in this particular view here from the top, effectively the vehicle is scanning any methane plume originating above the vehicle. And so we illustrate this with this blue shading area, which we call the field of view. The field of view is a computed concept that is dependent on the wind direction and the wind speed. So effectively, as you drive this area shaded in blue has been surveyed and has been covered in terms of ALD detection. The power of this technique is that you can detect leaks again, coming from hundreds of feet away, so you can cover not only the mains, but you can cover the services all the way to the meter set. And this is in contrast to traditional gas detection, which is done on foot, and where you essentially feel that directly on top of the leak, you might miss it. So we've done a lot of work over the years with our operator partners, and we have demonstrated that advanced leak detection using a Picarro vehicle yields upwards of 90% find rate on gradable leaks. And this is a drastic improvement from the traditional on-foot gas detection using ppm level sensors, which typically yields about 30% of the gradable leaks. So we have up to a 3x improvement in leak find rate, and we can do that up to 2x faster than traditional in terms of effective speed. So how do we accomplish this in terms of technology? So we embed our technology in regular commercial vehicles that can scan infrastructure. So in terms of hardware, we have a gas inlet system, which essentially collects the sample of the air at 4 hertz. So 4 times per second, we take in the air and the potential methane plumes contained in the air sample. And we have a parts per billion methane and ethane sensor mounted in the back of the vehicle. We capture wind speed and direction using a sonic anemometer mounted on the roof of the car. This gives us very precise information about the wind at 4 hertz per second. So we use this to derive information from the methane plumes. And we also have a GPS with the option of having an inertial capability to get very precise pinpointing of the position of the vehicle at the time of the methane plume detection. All this equipment is cloud connected. We transmit this information real time to the cloud. And we also have a driver user interface on a touchscreen tablet that's mounted in the vehicle, so that the driver can get real-time information about the progress of the surveying. So in terms of what we do with the data once it's beamed up to the cloud, well, we have established very specific data collection protocols that call for multiple passes over a particular area, as well as nighttime driving. This is really what defines the quality of the data. In terms of analytics, we have developed a atmospheric and methane plume model, which allows us to extract very useful information from the methane measurements that we do. We have embedded source discrimination, leveraging our ethane sensitivity. So that allows us to avoid false positives and false signals coming, for instance, from sewer gas, biogenic, or vehicle exhaust. And then finally, we have developed over the past 10 years very powerful algorithms that can both make an assessment in terms of the risk of a potential leak that's been detected, as well as a quantification of the flow rate. So a little earlier, I mentioned that we use the wind to bring the methane plumes to the vehicle. So obviously the question is, what if the wind is blowing in the wrong direction? Do you get any field of view? Do you get any coverage? Do you get any information of these assets? So the answer comes from our data collection protocol. We have a multi-pass, multi-day drive protocol where we prescribe 3 different drives. Each drive is done on both sides of the street. So we get basically 6 passes over a particular pipe asset. And these 3 drives have to be done over at least 2 different nights, and preferably during nighttime where the atmospheric conditions are calm and the methane plumes are the least disrupted and can make their way through the sensor. So we have demonstrated that this protocol gets you enough sampling of the wind conditions where you will have effective coverage of an area. So here we illustrate the point with this graph here. You can see 3 different drives of the same grid of streets. And each drive yields a little bit different wind conditions. And therefore, the field of view is a little bit different. And so what we do is we combine these 3 drives and we aggregate the data coming from these 3 drives in a probabilistic way, and we can build a combined field of view, combined coverage of the assets based on the accumulation of these 3 drives. So we might see methane plumes multiple times or only once, and then we have a statistical treatment that derives information from this. So this is essentially the third tenet of advanced leak detection. The first is a very sensitive detector, parts per billion. The second is it's a wind-based measurement. And the third is that we use powerful statistical treatment, probabilistic treatment of the data to yield actionable results. So we've built this data model over the past 10 years. And some of the key elements here is, again, we can detect gradable leaks in a distribution network at upwards of 90%, very, very reliably. We use wind data to calculate the coverage of the network area. And with our prescribed protocols, we typically get also upwards of 90% field of view coverage of assets. And then for each detected or potential source, emission source, we compute a risk assessment and the probability of the potential leak being a below ground, as well as an estimated emission flow rate. So we've been doing this for a while, just to illustrate how much data we have collected. Since 2015, with our customers, we have driven well over 3 million miles of main worldwide. And in terms of leak indications, potential leaks that we've analyzed and detected, we are also at the 3 million marks. So this is a very large data set that resides in our data warehouse. And we're using this data set to continuously inform and improve our algorithms so we can do a better job in assessing risk and flow rates of our measurements. So we are on the exponential growth trajectory here, where we think these numbers are going to double in the next couple of years as we keep deploying more and more equipment, more and more cars, and keep collecting more and more data. So we are on very strong trajectory to keep improving our model and keep making our analytics more and more actionable. So in terms of our software capabilities, so we've talked about data collection. I mentioned that all this data gets shared to the cloud. We have a cloud-hosted data warehouse where we store all our data and where we can apply our analytics. So we call this platform P-Cube. P-Cube is a multifaceted software platform, cloud-hosted. We have onboard geospatial analytics capabilities, embedded data security, as well as API access for easy sharing. We are SOC 2 and ISO 27K compliant for the P-Cube platform. And Picarro is now a ISO 9001 certified organization as well. So if you look at typically what the outputs of an ALD platform can be, we provide flat reports that can be used for a number of use cases. We have operation dashboards to monitor the performance and KPIs for the platform. We have built a state-of-the-art GIS interface, leveraging Esri and ArcGIS. And we also have a mobile capabilities for the platform where we can send some of the Picarro results to field investigators. So this platform, as I mentioned at the top of my remarks, this platform powers 3 different broad categories of applications. So I just wanted to spend a minute talking about this. So the first application. I would say has been the legacy application for Picarro is powering advanced compliance leak surveys. So ALD can be used for leaks detection and reporting at speed and scale. And the risk ranking analytics package can let the operator prioritize leaks by risk. So the ability to predict the risk will enable an operator to start working on the backlog in a sequential way, starting with the leaks that have the potential to be high grades. So this helps increase network safety and reduce order calls by finding problematic leaks before the public can find them. Over the past few years, we have really done a lot of work on two areas. The first one is emissions quantification reduction. So Picarro has developed a comprehensive framework to cover an entire distribution network, quantify every single potential emission source coming from the network, and produce a way to report on the total network emissions. So this gives you kind of the overall emission budget for your network or the slice of the network that you're measuring with ALD. And then beyond that, we also have developed a very powerful methodology to drive emissions reduction. This is something we call the super emitter program. If you would like to know more about this, we have another kind of on-demand webinar on our website that you can refer to. This is a very powerful kind of 1-2 punch technique where we can quantify overall emissions, and then we can identify areas of specific interest in terms of super emitters, large leaks that disproportionately contribute to emissions. So the main topic of today, and what Caroline is going to talk to you about, is the use of ALD data to drive pipeline replacement programs. So in this workflow, a portion of the network of interest is driven with Picarro, with ALD, and we can identify high priority areas and pipe assets that should be targeted for accelerated replacement. And the way we define that interest for accelerated replacement is either looking at a potential leak density on a particular pipe or potential emission density in cubic feet per hour per mile or per foot of asset. So the ALD methodology gives you access to those areas of interest. Obviously, you can still rely on your own DIMP model. And the power of the approach is you can combine the methane data produced by ALD with an existing DIMP model to augment it and drive decision making. This lets our operator clients to optimize their capital investments, make sure they're replacing the right pipe and working and acting on the right regions, and overall potentially reduce the operational repair budget by taking leaks out of the system through replacement instead of repairing them. So CenterPoint and Picarro have collaborated on this approach for the past 3 years. CenterPoint has one of the largest fleets of Picarro vehicles of any customers worldwide, and it's been very exciting to see some of these vehicles being applied to this emissions quantification approach and collecting data to drive pipeline replacement programs. So at this point, I would like to turn the mic over to Caroline, and she can tell us more about her DIM program. Caroline?
Hi, yes. Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Julian, for all that great information. He gave a lot of details about all of the great advantages to the Picarro advanced leak detection technology. But I'm going to talk to you today about a little bit about our implementation and the advantages we saw as operators with this technology. And then I'm going to really get into the meat of this presentation and how we've implemented this technology into our DIMP program. So as operators, our safety is our number one priority. We want to make sure that we're finding all leaks before they become any sort of issue. And with that in mind, we thought that this Picarro technology was great through the early pilot programs that we did with them, especially because of the increased sensitivity. If we're finding more leaks, we know what's out there. Without more knowledge equals more safe. We're more safe. So I really think that's great. The parts per billion, and then the area-based rather than asset-based survey was huge. Julian kind of touched on it earlier in his presentation, but really what we think the advantage of this is being able to detect leaks in an area instead of just traditional leak surveys where you're standing over the asset and that's the only place you're looking for those leaks. Leaks migrate, and that migration is hard to predict. So by having an area-based leak survey, we really get the whole picture. Also, finding more leaks is better for our integrity programs because the more data points and the more knowledge we have, the better results of our risk model. And that is really, I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but that's really one of the main benefits that we saw with this. Julian, I'm trying to change the, oh, there we go. Okay, so our current fleet, Julian mentioned, we do have about 14 cars in the Picarro ecosystem. Just a little background about CenterPoint Energy. We do distribute natural gas in 6 states: Indiana, Ohio, Louisiana, Mississippi, Minnesota, and Texas. We have a few million customers across that region. So currently we are using Picarro advanced leak detection technology to for all of our compliance leak surveys. We've seen that this has really helped us in getting ahead of a lot of leaks before customers call in. We've also run the Picarro cars a few times post natural disaster events, specifically Hurricane Harvey. I'm in the Texas office, so that's kind of the region I'm most familiar with. But we had a lot of flooding during Hurricane Harvey, and we were able to run the Picarro cars in those areas and try to find any leaks caused during that storm. We also are able to run the cars in higher risk accelerated leak survey areas as recommended by our DIMP group. This is helping us keep a better eye on areas that concern us year over year instead of the normal compliance leak survey schedule, depending on the state. Then the main advantage that we are going to be talking about today is this emissions quantification data. Basically, we're using that emissions data, and Picarro's through their analytics is able to estimate leak density on our assets and by area per mile of how many leaks that they think are in that specific leak survey grid. And this is really where we think a huge benefit is to our DIMP program and main replacement program. So before I talk about how we're implementing this technology into our DIMP program, I think it's important to discuss the current tools that we have at CenterPoint to identify the areas that we want to target through our main replacement program. These are not these are not a Picarro product, but Picarro products do influence both of these risk models. So on the left-hand side, this is our asset risk model. This lives in GIS. Each year, as part of our DIMP cycle, we take all of our mains in our entire system and run them through this risk model. This takes into consideration things like the material of the pipe, the year it was installed, coating, condition, where it's installed. Is it in the middle of downtown Houston? Is it in the middle of the country in a cow pasture? Those are all things that affect risk. There's hundreds of factors that go into creating that total risk score. And once we get that total risk score, we recolor all of our mains and GIS according to that risk score. So the red would be your highest risk and green would be your lowest risk. On the right-hand side, this is another visualization that we use within GIS. It's our leak density heat maps. It takes all of our historic below ground leaks over the last 5 years, excluding excavation, because we do not target main replacements due to excavation damage. That's not a risk that we mitigate through our main replacement program. So again, this takes all of our below ground leaks past 5 years, excluding excavation. So as we repair leaks that are that we've discovered, found using the Picarro data, those get repaired, a bunch of data is filled out, and those get put into these risk models. So the more data, the better picture that we have with both of these. Again, with the leak density heat maps, this is a concentration of leaks. So the red has the highest concentration of leaks, orange all the way down to white, which would be the least dense leak history. Okay. So each year, as part of our DIMP cycle, while we're recommending areas for main replacement, we combine these leak density heat maps with our asset risk model in GIS, and we review all of these high risk areas. So the red blobs, we call them blobs, red blob leak density heat maps overlapped with the asset risk gives us our top tier of risk. This, combining these two, gives us and shows us what should be leaking based off of our historical leak data and the leaks associated with those assets in the past. So it does predict and tell us what should be happening, but this is a static look at what's happening. We only do this once a year. Something else to say, so about our DIMP program, we look at each of these red blobs every year, including the ones that were red the previous year. So we have to review these year over year, and there's a ton of places, but, and you know, as a DIMP person, as a risk, I want to replace all of it, but it's just not possible. So what the Picarro EQ does is help us differentiate between, you know, what's truly high risk and where to start for certain projects. Because sometimes, while I would love to do all of the miles, which is thousands of miles, we can only do 100 or so. So where do we start and how do we make those decisions? And that's how this Picarro EQ data truly becomes the third tool in our toolbox with making the best decisions for our main replacement program. So here is kind of a first look on the right-hand side of what this Picarro EQ data dashboard looks like. The grid lines are our leak survey compliance, our compliance leak survey grids, and they are colored based off of the leak density that was estimated using the emissions data. So again, this is kind of a third tool in the toolbox. What's the benefit of this EQ mode is that no compliance work comes out of running it in just the EQ mode. Again, I wanted to mention our DIMP program, as well as our leak survey plan, is totally in compliance with all PHMSA regulations. So as we are running our compliance leak survey and our accelerated leak survey runs, we are also collecting this EQ data, which is very beneficial, and it automatically gets uploaded into this dashboard so we can see it right away. So we, as a DIMP group, every year we look at all of these areas, and some areas, like I mentioned, are higher risk than others, and we want to look at those year over year. So we recommend areas that we would like to accelerate their leak survey schedule. We also recommend areas that we would like to only run in the EQ mode. Again, no compliance works comes from EQ only mode because they're already being surveyed according to their compliance schedule. So when we just run it in EQ, we can just get an estimated sense of how many leaks they think there are. In 2019, we drove the EQ mode about 750 miles. 2020, we really ramped up, did about 1,600 plus miles. 2021, we did a little bit less. We shifted from running the car primarily in Texas and Arkansas to Minnesota and Louisiana and Mississippi so that they could also benefit from this data. Again, this is a third tool that we really feel helps us work in the best places and really mitigate the most risk. So this, combined with our leak density heat maps and our asset risk, we truly think helps us achieve our goals from a risk management standpoint. So here is another view, a little more zoomed in view of that Picarro EQ dashboard. Again, this is separate from GIS. The other two risk models live in GIS, and this is its own separate dashboard that Picarro manages. So our assets are the green and purple lines. Those would be our gas mains. The purple is plastic, the green represents steel gas lines. And then again, our leak survey compliance grids are shown. And those are the big kind of square polygons that have different colors. So as they collect this emissions data, they run a lot of background analytics, and it shows up with an estimated number of leaks on our main. So a thicker red line indicates more leaks that are estimated to be on that line. And then a red leak survey grid indicates more estimated leaks in that grid. So 4 would be red. You can see the different colors there on the legend. Another interesting thing that's not shown on the slide is that you can click on each of the leak survey grids and see the estimated emissions for that particular grid, and also the last time data was collected on that grid, which is great because you can see, especially for the accelerated leak surveys, once a year you can see how those emissions change. And as you do projects, you can see how the emissions change. So again, we think that this is helpful for prioritizing projects, confirming areas we want to work in, whether we want to just monitor an area and not work in that area, or just to gather more information about a specific area. So I'm going to go through some examples of truly how we've implemented this now that we kind of understand how it works, what it looks like. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so the first example is using the Picarro EQ data to confirm an area that we want to work in. Year over year, like I said, we look at all of those high risk red blobs with the asset risk model overlaid with it. And some we've already started working in, so we want to continue working in those areas. But there's also new areas that pop up as things shift within the system. So as I went through, this was actually last year, as I went through, was looking at this red area. And some of our areas, as I'm sure a lot of other operators know, they're acquired systems. We don't necessarily know the exact date of when they were installed, so we do have to make an estimate, an assumption on that. So this is showing up red. The assets are showing up green, yellow here on the left-hand side of the screen. And but then when looking at the Picarro EQ data on the right-hand side, I circled that blue line is indicating what's shown on the left-hand side of the screen because they're two different applications. So just to be clear, the blue line is what's shown on the left-hand side, so you can kind of relate the two. As you can see on the right-hand side, that Picarro EQ data, the grids are showing up as almost maroon on the top right, and then red on the left, which is saying that based on the emissions data, we think that there's quite a few leaks in this particular area. So this was an area that I recommended we work in for last year. So again, all of the risk models aligned on this one. So our leak density heat map, our asset risk model, and the Picarro EQ data gave us a live view of what was actually going on in our system at this time. Here is an example of an area that we decided to monitor instead of confirm to work in. So again, we can't work everywhere, and we want to make sure that we're working in our highest risk areas and getting those high risk assets out before we continue to replace other areas. So in 2019, this area actually showed up as a red high risk area, and we did end up running the Picarro EQ data to try and figure out what was going on. Then in 2020, the red area went away, and we were able to look at the Picarro EQ data from the year before, and it didn't really show us as it wasn't high risk. It wasn't red. It wasn't that maroon color like we saw on the last slide. It was just this green yellow color. So then we decided not to do work in this area, and we worked in other areas that were high risk. We, again, in 2021, if you click one more time, yeah. In 2021, we looked at this area again, and as you can see on the left-hand side, the heat map hasn't changed much. There's no red, still that orange yellow color. So things aren't escalating in this area, or so we think looking at the heat map. And then the Picarro EQ data actually confirmed that. So we were able to work in other areas. Again, the Picarro EQ data on the right is showing how the green and the yellow is indicating low risk or low leak density based off of the emissions data. So that combined with the heat maps unchanged gave us a good idea that we could work elsewhere and our time and resources would be spent better elsewhere. So this is an area that was actually accelerated for replacement during our review of the system. So on the right-hand side, you can see that's the Picarro EQ data. I mentioned that each year we look at our leak density heat maps that are red. As you can see on the left, there is no red blob. There's barely even any orange. However, this was close to one of our other heat maps, and I always have our Picarro EQ dashboard open as well. And I noticed the red area on that map. And so that made me want to investigate what was going on in this area a little bit more. So had we just looked at our asset risk model and our leak density heat map, this area probably would not have been recommended for replacement due to so many other areas showing up as higher risk. But because this Picarro EQ data is estimating that there's quite a few leaks in this area, we did decide to move forward and make this replacement. But without it, we would not have known exactly what was going on. So I think this is probably one of the most powerful examples that I'm going to discuss today. This area in particular is, this is the area that keeps me up at night. This is our highest risk area. As you can see, it's a very large heat map. The other examples, they were smaller areas, maybe a couple miles. It was easy to say where do we start? It's just do the whole thing. This area is 65 plus miles of high risk assets. So as a DIMP person, I want to replace all of it. I don't want it in there. I want it all gone, but realistically, that's not possible. Budgeting doesn't allow for that. Resources don't allow for that. So how do you start? How do you decide what's more risky in an all high risk area? It's hard to prioritize. As I go through these examples, the black line is going to be shown on each of the slides so that you can see the area I'm talking about. They're really large images, so it's hard to fit them all on one screen. So this is our leak density heat map overlaid with our asset risk maps. You can see lots of high and medium risk areas. So then looking at the Picarro EQ data, this gives us a little bit better picture as to the areas we would want to start in. So again, the black line is the same black line that was on the other one. This is the exact same area shown on the previous screen, just a different view. This is the Picarro EQ view that we like to look at. So as you can see, it's all pretty medium to high risk. There's red and orange and that dark, almost purple maroon color. So based off of this Picarro EQ data, this does give us a little bit more differentiation and where to start. This is, again, a live view into what's happening. The heat maps are only done once a year, so we can only have a snapshot into what happened then, and it's based off historical data. And it predicts what should be leaking, while this Picarro EQ data is saying, hey, this is what we're seeing, this is what's happening right now. So again, this data was our way to prioritize projects to replace all 65 plus miles of this area. So again, here's kind of how engineering broke down the different projects and how they prioritize them. This is actually an old slide. I think all of these projects are now done. But what I want to point out is that we were able to prioritize projects 1, 2, and 6, where the stars are, because those overlapped with where that dark red, maroon colors were on that Picarro EQ data. Again, 7 projects, it's tough to how to say which one's more risky when just looking at this, but using this in conjunction with the Picarro EQ data, it makes it a little more clear areas that we would like to start in. Ideally, actually the plan this year is to do an accelerated leak survey again on this area. So we'll do a compliance run, and we will also collect that EQ data. So hopefully, by the end of this year, I'll have another update so we can see how the Picarro EQ data has changed since we've replaced this entire area. So this is an example of, I used to be in the engineering group that actually executed the DIM projects. This is an example of a recommendation that was given. And as you can see, the red blob on the left-hand side with the black box around it was where I was initially told to start looking to do some projects. Initially, we thought we were gonna be able to replace the whole area in a single year, but then budget, as always, budget things happen. Gotta be flexible. So we were only able to we only had room in the budget for 3 miles as compared to 16 miles that is in this area. So 3 miles, it all seems pretty high risk. Where do we start? What's the best place to start? So looking at this Picarro EQ data, you can see that the grids are red. And I showed this blue box so that you can see how it overlaps with the heat map. So the blue box between the two red blobs isn't red, it's on that orange, which isn't necessarily where you would start looking to scope a project. Typically, it would start in the red areas. But in this case, we can only do 3 miles, and I want to make sure they're the best, most risky 3 miles that we can get out of the ground. So looking at the Picarro EQ data, I saw where the red areas were, and also noticed that there was an elementary school in the vicinity. To me, that's a great place to start replacing miles in this area. So that's where I chose to start. And this is just an example of showing how you can also use this Picarro EQ data to scope projects and prioritize projects when budgeting does become a limiting factor. This is just the and showing that the end result that we actually did a project here using that example. So kind of in summary, to go over some of the examples that I just gave and some of the applications that we're using this Picarro EQ data for. So again, we're using the Picarro for our compliance leak survey run. So as we repair leaks, those get put into our risk models. But then we're also using the Picarro EQ dashboard and the leak density estimation based off the emissions quantification data to prioritize different phases in our DIMP program. It's an additional investigation tool that we can run year over year to gather more information, especially in those areas that we don't have the best records and we have to make assumptions based off their install date. And then it can also help us make decisions about whether or not we should monitor an area and use our resources somewhere else, or to definitely work in an area because all 3 of our models are telling us to. Last year was the first year that we used this Picarro EQ data for project selection in Texas. We're going to continue to do that this year and planning to expand this to other regions this year so that hopefully we have some more examples and we can keep showing how it does work. We want to expand this company-wide. India and Ohio should be gearing up this year. Another advantage that we are looking into for using the Picarro advanced leak detection technology is to do quality control after new pipe installations. Incorrect operations leaks are a self-inflicted issue across operators and are preventable. We want to, as long as we have our right processes in place, we want to make sure that we're following those. But we do see a lot of incorrect operation leaks on all of these plastic installations. So what we're looking at doing is statistically sampling some of our large plastic installation projects and running the Picarro cars maybe right after and then maybe 6 months after to see if there are leaks associated in those projects. And then that way, if so, we can get ahead of the problem by looking into if it's an individual person, a specific contractor, what's going on. So we can do some additional training and get those issues fixed before they become more issues later on and continue to do the same thing that can cause issues. So those are just some of the things that we're looking at doing. That concludes my presentation. I think we have some questions in the Q&A section, but now's that time.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. Thank you so much. Yeah, we have a couple questions already in the Q&A. The first one is about the EQ drives. So when you run the EQ drives, are you doing leak investigation of the indications that are produced at the time of the run or not?
No, we investigate all of the leaks after the runs are complete. And if we're running it in EQ only mode, like I said, there are no leak investigations that are a result of that run. But there are leaks that or leak indication areas that are a result of all of our compliance leak surveys. So again, our compliance leak surveys and have their own schedule, and then DIMP, we sometimes say, hey, let's just go do EQ only mode, and that's kind of a separate thing. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, the EQ drives produce areas of interest, but they don't yield actual.
We're not actually going to investigate.
Yeah, leak indications that would need to be investigated. Yeah. Another question we have is on your replacement program. What is the annual replacement mileage for your renewal program? And then how much unprotected steel and cast iron do you have in your system?
I'm actually not sure on the specific numbers in terms of cast iron. I know in Texas, we no longer have any cast iron. I think all of those we're working to get, those are a top tier risk. Those are more of a prescriptive replacement that we're actively trying to replace regardless of how they show up on those heat maps. What was the beginning part of that question?
Annual replacement mileage for the renewal program, approximately how much you replace every year?
About 600 or so plus whatever to be in compliance, and then sometimes we do a little bit more.
Okay, thank you. One question for Picarro. Can you explain further on what below ground probability means? So this is something I mentioned earlier in the presentation. So we're able to make a risk assessment for each indication or potential emission source that we detect. And so it's essentially a correlation to what we think the eventual grade will be if this indication is investigated, the leak is found, and the leak is graded. We can also use the same methane data to make a prediction whether this is the indication is coming most likely from an above ground kind of meter set leak versus a below ground leak on the actual pipe. And so this is something, again, it's a prediction. It's not a prescriptive results, but we do see some correlation between some aspects of the plumes, the concentration, the width of it as we collected, and its eventual origin, whether it's above ground or below ground. So this is part of what we would call predictive analytics that we can run on the raw data in order to present data to the operator in a way that's useful. One question I have for you, Caroline, is when you look at recommended areas for replacement, how do you think about the service pipes as opposed to the main pipes? Is there a different approach there?
Great question. So our services are replaced with our mains. When we're looking at the asset risk, that takes into consideration services as well. That all rolls up into that total risk score. And for those leak density heat maps, service leaks are also included in those leak density heat map areas. So as we are recommending mains for replacement, we are also replacing the services under that same project. So as a mains replaced, we replace the services as well, unless they're modern plastic, we'll do a cut and tie or something.
Great. And then we have one more question on quantification of the leaks. What is the EQ quantification criteria we use in standard cubic feet per hour? So I can help maybe answer this one a little bit. So when we drive a particular area in EQ mode, we're collecting all the emissions coming from that area. And we have actually a fairly low detection threshold. It's quite common for us to be able to pick up small leaks on the 10 to the -2 cubic feet per hour. So we can be, we have a low detection threshold. And so we accumulate all this data. There are leaks of high consequence, typically anything that's above 10 standard cubic feet per hour is probably venting pretty hard and should be looked into, but we have an entire range of leak sizes in cubic feet per hour. And so that's one way to look at the data. Our model lets you look at either concentration of leaks, so leak density, number of leaks per mile of asset, or you can also look at emissions density, right? So you could have a cubic feet per hour of emissions per mile. And so in principle, you could use either one to guide your selection areas you're interested in. In the case of CenterPoint, the metric that's used is leak density, essentially regardless of the size of the leak. But they're two metrics that essentially look at the same thing. Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question. It appears wind is necessary to get coverage. What velocity of wind is needed to get a certain distance of coverage? Our survey operations stop if there's little to no wind. So that's another one I can take. So contrary to intuition, actually low wind conditions are favorable for data collection. We like very calm nights with very little wind, low single-digit miles per hour. That's essentially because when a leak is there, the plume is being emitted. Even a 1 mile or 2 mile per hour wind will progressively and gradually bring the plume over to its point of collection. So we like low wind conditions. And again, the fact that we do all 3 drives, 6 passes on 2 different nights, pretty much guarantees with the randomness of wind conditions that we will at some point get some field of view on that particular leak. So the field of view is not very sensitive to the speed of the wind in terms of low speed, and we can get that 600-foot coverage field of view very easily, even in low speed wind speed condition. And then on the flip side, if we have excessive wind speed, we have implemented hard thresholds in our system where you can start flagging some of these breadcrumbs and data collection points if the wind is blowing too hard or if the environment or the weather conditions are adverse. I think this might be all the time we have for questions. So we'll make sure to record all the other questions and then try to answer them offline as best we can. Thank you, Caroline. At this time, I would like to turn the mic over back to Anne.
Okay, thank you, Caroline, and thank you, Julian, for today's session. We would like to thank all of our attendees for joining this presentation and remind everyone that a link to the recording of this webinar will be provided later on today or tomorrow. We hope you all enjoyed gaining a better understanding of the information and material presented, and to seeing you all in future presentations. Thanks again and have a great and safe day.